Today on Fish Memoirs, we're going to talk about the only open war that ever took place between Mexico and the United States, a conflict that changed the course of North American history. Because from that moment on, the balance of power in the region shifted forever. Today on Fish Memoirs, the U.S. intervention in Mexico, also known as the Mexican-American War. Let's go back to where all this began. When Mexico became independent from what was left of the Spanish Empire, it controlled vast territories that today belong to the United States. We're talking about places as important as California, Nevada, New Mexico, Utah, Colorado, Arizona, and parts of Wyoming, Kansas, and Oklahoma. The problem was that Mexico as a nation was still in its infancy, and its military capacity was extremely limited. And to the north, Mexico had a very annoying neighbor, the United States of America. The US wasn't satisfied with its independence, it wanted to become a much more powerful country. And it was doing just that. While it was industrializing at a fast pace, it was also looking to expand its borders and claim more and more land. For example, the United States had bought Louisiana from Napoleon, which Napoleon had previously purchased from Fernando VII of Spain. Yes, those brilliant moves by Fernando VII, you already know him. And in 1819, Spain ceded Florida to the United States in exchange for keeping Texas. And that right there is where the trouble began. When Mexico became independent from Spain, it took control of all the territories that once belonged to the Viceroyalty of New Spain, including what would one day become the state of Texas. However, the Spanish crown had already made it easy for US settlers to migrate to Texas long before Mexico's independence, simply to keep good relations with the United States. Spain was in no position to pick fights, so avoiding new enemies was a priority. Because of this, when Mexico became independent, a significant part of the population in Texas consisted of American settlers. Tensions between Mexico and these Texan colonists were constant from the very beginning, for many different reasons, but above all, for one, slavery. The abolition of slavery in Mexico hit the Texan settlers right where it hurt, in their pockets, since their plantations depended on enslaved labor. As tensions escalated, many of these settlers organized and declared Texas independent in 1836, taking advantage of the fact that Mexico had just gone through a coup d'etat. Mexico didn't like that one bit and decided to crush the Texan separatists. The so-called Texas War of Independence began with major Mexican victories. But then Mexico got overconfident and was caught off guard, suffering a crushing defeat at the Battle of San Jacinto. In that battle, the Mexican general and commander of the army, Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, was captured by the forces of Samuel Houston. And yes, now you know where the name of the city of Houston comes from. After this defeat, the captured general was forced to sign a peace treaty recognizing Texas's independence, a treaty that the Mexican government never accepted as legitimate. Mexico didn't bury the hatchet. It tried to retake the territory through different incursions, but the United States, which had supported the Texan separatists from the start, went one step further and annexed Texas in 1845. But the United States didn't stop there. It soon made an offer for more Mexican territory, as the US government wanted to buy New Mexico and Alta California. The Mexican government refused, but the United States was determined to take those lands one way or another. To provoke a war, US President James K. Polk sent a small army to a disputed area between the Nueces River and the Rio Grande. These US troops arrived in 1846, leading to what became known as the Thornton Affair, in which 11 American soldiers were killed. It was then that President James K. Polk asked Congress to declare war, and on May 13, 1846, Congress approved it. The first clash of the war took place on May 8, 1846, at the Battle of Palo Alto, where the United States claimed victory. The following day, at Resaca de la Palma, the Northern forces won again. This allowed the U.S. to capture its first city, Matamoros. The 30,000 soldiers fighting under the U.S. flag were simply too strong for the young and fragile Mexican nation, and the nephews of Uncle Sam had an ace up their sleeve. In Alta California, something very similar to Texas was happening. A large number of American settlers had moved there looking for new opportunities. So, following the Texan example, the colonists organized and declared the independence of Alta California, adopting the bear and the star as their symbol. That bear and that star can still be seen today on the flag of California. Although the Mexican army put up a brave and determined resistance, the United States kept winning battle after battle, capturing San Francisco, San Juan Bautista, San Diego, San Pedro, and Los Angeles on August 13th. In the end, just as it had done with Texas, the United States annexed all of Baja California. The Mexican army had no choice but to retreat and wage a guerrilla war, which would come to an end in 1847. Just a few days before the fall of Los Angeles, on August 2nd, the United States opened a new front in New Mexico. This move caught the Mexicans completely off guard, leaving them unable to put up any organized resistance. Las Vegas, San Miguel, and Santa Fe fell with barely a fight. On September 19th, 1846, one of the largest battles of the war took place, the Battle of Monterrey. In this brutal clash, U.S. forces crushed the Mexican troops in fierce street fighting, where American tactical skill overcame Mexican defenses. This was also the first time the St. Patrick's Battalion took part in combat, a unit made up mostly of Irish volunteers who had deserted from the U.S. Army. Still, despite being economically and militarily weaker than the United States, Mexico would not go down without a fight. In October 1846, the First Battle of Tabasco unfolded. 7 U.S. ships arrived in Tabasco confident they would take the city easily, but they underestimated the courage and determination of the Tabasqueños, who, with barely any professional soldiers and in clear inferiority, managed to repel the U.S. troops. It was one of the few Mexican victories in the entire war. Things were already looking grim for Mexico on the battlefield, but they were about to get even worse for the land of tacos and tequila. On top of the disastrous war with the United States, a series of uprisings broke out in the Yucatan Peninsula. And if that wasn't enough, a federalist revolt also erupted in Mexico City. Although the government eventually put down these uprisings, they severely weakened Mexico's ability to wage war. Imagine fighting a much stronger enemy while your own country keeps tripping you up from behind. Meanwhile, General Taylor's U.S. forces advancing from the north were proving to be an almost unstoppable foe, capable of winning even when outnumbered. In February 1847, at the Battle of Buena Vista, an army of 4,700 U.S. soldiers under General Taylor faced 15,000 men commanded by the veteran General Santa Anna, who had just returned from exile. But the outcome was the same as before. The disciplined U.S. troops, despite their smaller numbers, were too strong for the Mexican army, which failed to break their lines. In the end, Santa Anna was forced to retreat from the battlefield. To overwhelm Mexico's already overstretched defenses, the United States opened a new front, capturing the port of Veracruz to use it as a base for a direct advance toward the heart of Mexico. Tabasco was attacked again in June 1847. With no supplies and almost no ammunition left, the city surrendered. By then, everything was ready for the United States to deliver the final blow to Mexico by taking Mexico City. To pave the way for the conquest of the capital and make it as smooth as possible, the United States launched a series of military operations that ended with American victories at Lomas de Padierna, at the heroic Mexican defense of Churubusco, and at Molino del Rey, which was followed by the storming of Chapultepec Castle. There, the cadets of the military academy fought to the bitter end. To this day, these young men are remembered as Los Niños Héroes, the boy heroes. After these battles, and despite the efforts of some civilians to resist the well-armed American troops, Mexico City was captured, and Santa Anna resigned from the presidency. The end of the war left Mexico in total and absolute bankruptcy, and for the Mexican people it was a moral blow without precedent. With the peace negotiations and the signing of the treaties of Cahuenga and Guadalupe Hidalgo, the United States took control of Texas, the disputed territory north of the Rio Grande, as well as Alta California and Santa Fe de Nuevo Mexico. In practice, this meant annexing what are today the states of Arizona, California, Nevada, Utah, New Mexico, and parts of Colorado, Wyoming, Kansas, and Oklahoma. Mexico lost more than 2,100,000 square kilometers of land, about 55% of its territory at the time. In exchange, the United States paid $15.1 million as compensation for war expenses. For the United States, this overwhelming victory gave a massive boost to its economic growth and territorial expansion. The country consolidated itself as an emerging world power, one that Europe's great nations could no longer ignore. The war also served as valuable combat experience for many American officers who would later play key roles in the U.S. Civil War. Mexico's defeat can be summed up in a few key points. 1. It was a country with less than half the population of the United States. 2. Its constant internal conflicts had severely slowed its development. 3. The level of U.S. industrialization was on a completely different scale. Mexico hadn't yet gone through an industrial revolution, while the United States could produce more and better weapons, huge amounts of ammunition, and a naval fleet 6 times larger than Mexico's. 4. And finally, there was very little domestic support for the war. only 7 of the 19 states in the Mexican Federation contributed men, weapons, and money to the national defense. And that's it. Do you think Mexico could have stood a chance against the United States with better organization? Should Mexico reclaim these territories from Uncle Sam? That's all for today's video. You know the drill. If you enjoyed the story, give it a like, hit subscribe, and dive in for the next one.